Cast iron skillets range from around $30 to over $200. But are the expensive ones actually better? And how do they compare to an 85-year-old Griswold? To find out, I tested 12 cast iron skillets. Besides cooking with each one for several months, I conducted a series of controlled tests. I measured how quickly and evenly they heat, how well they retain heat, how hot the handles get, whether they warp under extreme heat, and how cleanly they pour. To see if the skillets with a smooth surface actually release food better than the ones with a rough surface, I cooked eggs in each skillet at the exact same temperature using the same amount of grease. And to see how evenly each skillet cooks across the entire surface, I cooked 3 pancakes at the same time with parts of each pancake positioned near the center and closer to the sidewalls so I could compare the browning. I also compared the weight, cooking surface size, wall height, handle design, and thickness of each skillet. In this video, I'll show you which skillets performed the best and which ones aren't worth the money. I'll also give you a chart so you can easily compare them side by side. I'll start with the least expensive skillet and end with the most expensive. The Lodge Classic is made in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, and it's the least expensive skillet I tested. It has a rough cooking surface, pour spouts on both sides, and a short handle. At 5 millimeters thick and 8.1 pounds, it's the thickest and heaviest skillet in the group. Because of the thick construction, it heated slower than the thinner skillets, but it retained heat well. It also stayed completely flat after I heated it on a powerful induction cooktop at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 minutes, which was not the case with some of the others. Despite the rough cooking surface, the egg didn't stick at all. It didn't slide quite as freely as it did on some of the smoother skillets, but the difference was pretty minor. This skillet performs great, but I'm not a huge fan of the handle. It's a little too short, and when I boiled water in each skillet for 10 minutes to compare handle temperatures, it was too warm to grab with a bare hand. The Victoria skillet is made in Colombia, and like the Lodge, it has a rough cooking surface with pour spouts on both sides. It's a little lighter at 7.2 pounds, but the biggest design difference is the handle, which is much longer and it stays cooler. It was one of the fastest skillets to heat up, but it also retained heat slightly better than the heavier Lodge Classic. It also performed well in the warp test. There was only a very slight gap in the bottom before heating, and I didn't see any additional warping afterward. The egg stuck slightly at first and needed a little help from the spatula, but once it released, it moved around the pan easily. In the pancake test, the parts closer to the center browned more than the parts near the sidewalls, which happened with almost every skillet. The Lodge Chef Collection has the same rough cooking surface as the Lodge Classic, but the walls are a 1/4 inch shorter and more sloped, which makes it easier to slide a spatula under food near the edges. The handle is also slightly longer, the walls are thinner, and it's almost 2 pounds lighter. Despite the lighter construction, it actually had the best heat retention of all 12 skillets. I also noticed that the bottom was slightly concave, which explains why the outer part of the cooking surface heated slightly faster than the center, and why the pancakes browned a little more evenly than most of the others. Fortunately, that shape didn't get any worse during the warp test. In the egg test, it stuck slightly at first and needed a little help from the spatula, but once it released, it moved around the pan easily. The next skillet is also made by Lodge, but it has some interesting upgrades and one potentially deal-breaking flaw. Before I get into that, I want to quickly thank HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. One thing I really love about HelloFresh is the variety. They're constantly adding new recipes inspired by cuisines from around the world, so it's a great way to try something new without researching a bunch of recipes or trying to track down all the ingredients. Recently, I made the surf and turf with shrimp and steak, the chicken and crispy prosciutto Caesar salad, the sweet soy chicken and spinach grain bowl, and the pistachio crusted lamb chops with creamy polenta. The grain bowl was one of my favorites. It had a really good mix of sweet, spicy, tangy, and crunchy, and everything tasted fresh. I really like how HelloFresh lets you customize most of the meals. You can swap the protein, double the protein, or adjust it around what you and your family actually like. If you want to give HelloFresh a try, scan the QR code or click the link in the video description. With your 3rd box of an active subscription, you get a free Caraway food storage container set, which is a $155 value. This offer is available for a limited time while supplies last. The Lodge Blacklock has the same rough cooking surface as the other Lodge skillets, but it's thinner and lighter, and it has a longer, redesigned handle. It heated more evenly than most of the skillets, with only a 32-degree difference between the center and the edge after 2 minutes. It also retained heat very well and stayed stable during the warp test with no noticeable change. The egg stuck slightly at first and needed a small nudge with the spatula, but after that it moved around the pan. The biggest issue for me is the handle. It gets very wide where it connects to the skillet, then it narrows toward the end, and the edges feel sharp and dig into your hands. The pour spouts are also pretty small, so water can spill over the rim if you pour too fast. The Stargazer is made in the USA and has flared rims instead of pour spouts, a large helper handle, and the longest handle of the group. Unlike the Lodge and Victoria skillets, the cooking surface is smooth, and because of that, it performed extremely well in the egg test. The egg released immediately and slid around the pan without any help from the spatula. The flared rim also poured cleanly. It was one of the fastest skillets to heat, but there was a large difference between the center and the edge after 2 minutes, and heat retention was middle of the pack. In my warp test, it started completely flat, but after heating, the center bowed outwards slightly, which resulted in a minor wobble. The biggest differentiator with this pan is the handle. The deep groove gives your hand something to grip, so the skillet doesn't twist when you're holding it with a towel or oven mitt. But the edges dig into your hand, so despite being long and secure, it's not a very comfortable handle. The Victoria Signature Series has a more high-end look than the standard Victoria. The cooking surface is smoother, the walls are thinner, and the split-style handle has a piece of metal in the middle. It heated fairly quickly, and heat retention was average. In the egg test, it stuck slightly at first, but once I loosened it with the spatula, it was fine. The pour spouts also worked really well. In my warp test, the bottom was already concave, and after heating, that gap became larger. When a pan warps like this, it stays flat and stable on the cooktop, which is great, but when you pour oil into the center, it flows toward the edges instead of spreading evenly. I like that the handle stays cool, but I prefer simpler one-piece handles with fewer seams and fewer parts to clean around. The made-in skillet is made in the USA, and it has a smooth interior, tall walls that curve gradually into the cooking surface, and large primary and helper handles. It's the second heaviest skillet I tested, only behind the Lodge Classic. The handle is almost as long as the Stargazer handle, but the shallow groove gives you good control without the sharp edges digging into your hand. In my heat tests, the center heated fairly quickly, but there was a 130-degree difference between the center and the edge after 2 minutes of heating, which was the second largest gap in the group. Heat retention was average. In my months of testing, I found that this skillet takes a little longer for the heat to spread across the entire surface. But if you let it heat gradually for a few minutes, it cooks evenly and it's great for searing. The smooth surface also performed extremely well in the egg test. The egg released immediately and slid around the pan with no sticking, and the pour spouts didn't drip at all. In the warp test, it started out completely flat, but after heating, the center bowed outwards slightly and the pan developed a minor wobble. So you need to be careful and preheat slowly, especially on induction. Smithey is made in Charleston, South Carolina. It has a smooth cooking surface, large pour spouts, and a heat ring around the bottom that allows for some expansion while still keeping the skillet stable. The cooking surface is nearly as thick as the Lodge Classic, but the sidewalls are much thinner, so you still get a substantial base without the unnecessary weight in the walls. The handle is shorter than made-in and Stargazer, but the wide flat shape is comfortable and it gives you control when tilting. The 3 holes in the helper handle give it a unique look. In my tests, it heated slower than some of the thinner skillets, but it retained heat really well. The smooth surface also performed perfect in the egg test. The egg released immediately and slid around the pan without sticking. In the warp test, the center bowed outwards slightly after heating, but the heat ring kept it from extending far enough to make the skillet wobble, so it stayed stable on the cooktop. One thing to know about Smithey, made-in, and some of these other skillets with smooth cooking surfaces is that the seasoning can be harder to build evenly at first. It can look blotchy or fade in spots, but over months of cooking, it gradually darkens and evens out. In the meantime, just make sure to dry it thoroughly after washing, otherwise it can rust. Field Company is made in the USA, and it's the second lightest skillet I tested. It has a smooth cooking surface, thin sidewalls, and a flared rim instead of pour spouts. The thinner, lighter construction makes it easier to pick up and maneuver, and it heats up quickly. But because there's less mass to hold on to that heat, it had the second lowest heat retention in the group. The smooth surface performed well in the egg test. After a slight nudge, the egg slid around with no sticking. And despite not having pour spouts, the flared rim didn't drip. I like the primary handle, but the helper handle is the smallest in the group, so there isn't much to grab onto. The biggest issue with this skillet is warping. Field has a heat ring around the bottom, but after heating, the center bowed outward far enough to extend past the ring. That caused the skillet to wobble noticeably, and it even spun when I tapped the handle. The Lancaster is made in Pennsylvania, and it looks and feels a lot like the Smithey. It has a smooth cooking surface, large pour spouts, a flat handle, and a heat ring around the bottom. The smooth surface performed perfect in the egg test, and the pour spouts worked great. Heat retention was average, but it performed extremely well in the warp test. It started flat and stayed flat after heating, with no wobble or noticeable change. The handle shape is comfortable and gives you good control, but it gets noticeably hotter than some of the others during normal stovetop cooking. The helper handle is also pretty small. The Finex is made in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, and it's easily the most distinctive looking skillet in the group. It has an octagonal shape, a smooth cooking surface with rougher inner walls, and a stainless steel coil wrapped around the handle. The shape is mostly just for looks, but it actually works well for pouring. Instead of dedicated pour spouts, the corners give you multiple places to pour from, and in my test, they performed great with no spilling. The smooth cooking surface also performed well in the egg test, although I wish the inner walls were smooth. It would give it a much cleaner look. Heat retention was toward the lower end of the group, and it warped slightly, but not enough to cause noticeable wobbling. Finex says that the coiled handle stays cooler on the stovetop and cools down faster after you take the skillet out of the oven. In my stovetop handle test, it performed well and stayed cooler than most of the skillets. But when I heated it in a 400-degree oven to see how quickly the handle cooled, it was still too hot to touch after 15 minutes, and it wasn't any cooler than a regular cast iron handle. The handle is also very thick, round, and smooth, so the skillet can rotate in your hand when you're tilting it, especially with a towel or an oven mitt. And because the coil isn't removable, grease and moisture can collect underneath it around the cast iron shaft, and it's difficult to clean and dry. I also noticed that it rusted on the bottom inside the engravings, which didn't happen with any of the other skillets. Griswold is a vintage cast iron brand that's highly regarded by collectors and cast iron enthusiasts. They're thin, lightweight, and very smooth. The company made cookware in Erie, Pennsylvania for decades, but the original factory closed in 1957, so you can't just go into a store and buy one new today. This number 10 has the large Griswold logo, and it's believed to have been made somewhere between 1939 and 1944. I bought this one on eBay for $300, but depending on the model and condition, some Griswold pieces can sell for much more. At 4.8 pounds, it's the lightest skillet I tested, and the cooking surface is only about 3 millimeters thick. Because of that, it was the fastest skillet to heat, but it also had the biggest temperature difference between the center and the edge, and the lowest heat retention in the group. The cooking surface on this Griswold is extremely smooth, but surprisingly, it had the worst result in my egg test. I had to work the spatula underneath the egg to release it, and a small amount stuck. After about 85 years of use, the seasoning isn't perfectly even, and there are some small pits and marks in the surface, so that likely played a role. This skillet was already slightly warped when I bought it, which is one of the risks with vintage cookware. After the warp test, it got worse and the pan wobbled and spun on the cooktop. Even with the warping and age, it still cooks really well. It's easy to maneuver and it pours cleanly. It just behaves very differently from the thicker modern skillets because it heats up and cools down much faster. So which cast iron skillets are worth buying and which ones should you avoid? Before I give you my take, just a quick heads up that all 12 cast iron skillets that I tested are linked in the video description if you want to check them out. On the lower end, Victoria and Lodge Chef Collection are my two top picks. Victoria has a longer handle and excellent performance for the price. The Lodge Chef Collection is lighter, easier to maneuver, and had the best heat retention in my test. The Lodge Classic is also a great option if you want something more substantial, and the value is incredible. If you want a skillet with a smoother surface and a more high-end design, and you don't mind spending more to get it, Smithey and Made In are my two favorite premium options. I've used Smithey for over 2 years, and it's still one of the pans I reach for the most. Made In has my favorite handle of the group, and it cooks extremely well once it's fully preheated. Field, Stargazer, and Lancaster are all good skillets, but they're expensive and have enough drawbacks that I wouldn't recommend them over Smithey or Made In. On the other end, these are the skillets I don't recommend. They either have design flaws, performance issues, or the prices are just too high to justify. As for Griswold, Wagner, and other vintage cast iron, I would look at those more as collector's items. They can still cook extremely well, but I wouldn't spend hundreds of dollars expecting them to outperform a good modern skillet. If you're still not sure which one to buy, this chart will help you compare the options side by side. Pause the video to take a closer look, and if you have questions about any of these skillets, leave a comment below. If this video is helpful, check out this video where I give you rapid fire reviews of the top 31 stainless steel frying pans, or this video where I review the best Dutch ovens. And for more content like this, click the logo to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.